Look at a map of the world's capital cities. Do not just focus on the locations, but look closely at the dates. Look at the exact year each city became a center of government. When you sort them chronologically, a pattern emerges that no conventional history textbook explains. It is an undeniable trend that becomes impossible to ignore once you see it. Take Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, established in 1800. Before that, the government sat in Philadelphia, and before that, New York. The rising power in the Western Hemisphere could not settle on a permanent center of government for 2 decades. The official explanation points to a political compromise. Northern states wanted New York, while southern states wanted a location further south. They chose a swamp on the Potomac River, cleared it, and built a city. By 1800, it was ready. But consider the reality of building a massive capital city from nothing in 20 years, in a swamp with no prior settlement of significance, no established population, no existing infrastructure, and no documented labor force adequate for that scale. Cross the ocean and look at Tokyo. For most of Japan's recorded history, the capital was Kyoto. It was the imperial seat, the sacred center, and the city where emperors ruled for over 1,000 years. Then, in 1869, following the Meiji Restoration, the emperor relocated to Edo and renamed it Tokyo. The official explanation is modernization. Japan was opening to the Western world, and a new era required a new center. Edo was larger, commercially active, and better positioned for the future. Yet Kyoto still exists. Kyoto was not abandoned because it was inadequate. It was left behind despite being extraordinary. It possessed palaces, government complexes, and administrative infrastructure accumulated across centuries. Why leave functioning infrastructure of exceptional quality to construct an entirely new governmental core that would take decades to match? You do not abandon a working capital unless there is something in it you no longer want to be visibly associated with. A list of these occurrences reveals a striking timeline. This pattern does not span all of history, but is concentrated within a specific window between 1790 and 1870. The United States moved to Washington, D.C. in 1800, setting Philadelphia aside. Japan moved to Tokyo in 1869, setting Kyoto aside. Brazil achieved independence in 1822 and immediately began constructing new governmental centers separate from the established Portuguese colonial administration. Under British rule, the primary administrative center of India shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. Though it happened in 1911, it operated on the same logic: abandon the established coastal city and build fresh in the interior. Australia had Sydney and Melbourne, 2 functioning, growing cities with existing architecture and government infrastructure. Instead of choosing either, the newly federated government built Canberra in an empty field halfway between them, beginning in 1913. The official explanations are completely different for each nation. They cite political compromise, modernization, colonial restructuring, neutrality, or strategic geographic positioning. Every country offers its own unique rationale, but the outcome is identical. A working, established city with existing architecture, history, and infrastructure is set aside. A new city is built, frequently on empty land, with a speed that challenges explanation, featuring architecture that looks significantly older than its official construction dates suggest. If the entire point of a new capital was modernity and a clean break from the past, you would expect forward-looking architecture that expresses a unique confidence of a new era. That is not what they built. Washington, D.C. features neoclassical architecture of extraordinary scale and precision. The Capitol, the Treasury, and the departmental buildings along the National Mall reference ancient Rome and Greece. civilizations separated from early 19th century America by nearly 2,000 years. The official explanation is cultural aspiration, arguing the new republic wished to present itself as the heir to classical democracy. But aspiration does not explain the engineering, the stonework, the proportional decisions, and the structural solutions embedded in buildings supposedly constructed by a nation barely 2 decades old. Professional architects and structural engineers who examine these buildings often find them anomalous and inconsistent with the documented construction capacity of the period. The same pattern appears in Tokyo. The Meiji government buildings and administrative complexes raised in the late 19th century featured design choices and construction quality that specialists describe as inconsistent with the documented technology and labor capacity of the 1870s and 1880s. Canberra, built from scratch after 1913 in empty bushland, required a construction capacity that contemporary Australian records cannot adequately document for a country with a total population of under 5 million people. If you are building completely fresh, why does the architecture look inherited? Why does it feature proportions, towering doorways, and vast corridors scaled for something other than the people walking through them? To understand this, look at the cartographic reality of Tartaria. It appears consistently on European maps from the medieval period through the early 19th century, on Dutch maps, French maps, British encyclopedias, and Russian imperial surveys. The term designated vast territories across Central and Northern Asia, applied with the same certainty cartographers applied to France or Spain. Then it vanishes. It was not conquered in the ordinary way with extensive treaty records and contemporary political documentation, nor was it renamed gradually. It simply stops appearing. The encyclopedias stop including it. The maps redraw themselves, and the region becomes divided into different designations, like Russian imperial territory or Chinese administrative zones. This disappearance happens between approximately 1800 and 1840, matching the exact window in which these major capitals moved. Consider a structural hypothesis. What if the switched capitals were not about moving toward something, but moving away from something? Imagine a civilization coming into possession of existing vast infrastructure, buildings, cities, and administrative complexes that they didn't build and cannot fully explain. Remaining in those buildings means spending generations explaining why your construction records cannot account for the monumental architecture around you. The alternative is to build a new capital somewhere clean, with no prior architecture to contradict the story you're writing. Moving the capital solves the problem structurally. The new capital is attributed entirely to your era and your architects. The old capital, with its uncomfortable proportions and unverifiable origins, remains functional but is no longer the symbolic face presented to the world. The buildings in the old capital ask questions, while the buildings in the new capital tell your story. St. Petersburg serves as an early prototype for this mechanism. Peter the Great established it as Russia's capital in 1712, leaving behind Moscow, a city containing some of the oldest architecture associated with Tartaria. The official explanation was Peter wished to modernize Russia and orient it towards Europe. Yet the Hermitage complex, the Winter Palace, and the administrative buildings feature an architectural precision and stonework that challenge the labor and material records of the early 18th century. Peter did not move to build something superior to Moscow. He moved to leave Moscow behind. The official histories of these nations offer entirely different explanations for their moves, yet they share a single, uniform silence. No historian spends significant effort explaining what was fundamentally wrong or inadequate about Philadelphia, Kyoto, or Calcutta. The explanations focus entirely on the positive future of the destination, never on what was left behind. This uniformity across independent nations, cultures, and languages suggests a structural instinct rather than a coordinated conspiracy. When inheriting a civilization, the ordinary institutional instinct is to claim what is useful and omit what cannot be easily explained. The capitals moved because the buildings in the old centers were too large, too precisely constructed, and too difficult to account for within the accepted timelines. The new capitals were built in empty spaces because empty spaces have no prior architecture to contradict the story being written. They referenced Rome and Greece because those records are distant enough to prevent conflicting documentation. The previous civilization was quietly downgraded from a populated reality to an empty geographic footnote. The next time you look at a map of capital cities, look at the dates. Look at how many powerful governments chose